A few months ago, Yongnuo announced that they would be releasing an affordable 85mm f1.8 lens for full-frame Sony mirrorless cameras, and today I'm very happy to announce that I've managed to get my hands on a copy of this new lens. So in this video, I'll be putting it through its paces to see whether it's a total bargain that you definitely should buy, or whether it's just another cheap plasticky piece of shit. Now, I should start this review by saying, although this lens was officially released back in August of 2020, due to some supply issues, it's still not technically available to buy anywhere in the UK or US just yet. However, I did notice that you can purchase this lens through some Chinese dealers on eBay for around £265 or $359. So if you really cannot wait until a proper UK dealer is established, then this is a potential option for you in the meantime. But just before you all start reaching for your credit cards and logging into eBay, let's take a quick look at what this lens is made of. For a full frame lens, this Yongnuo 85mm f1.8 is very small and lightweight, coming in at just 346 grams or 12.2 ounces. When mounted to my Sony A7 III, this lens feels really lightweight and handles really nicely on a full frame camera. Now, the main reason why it's so lightweight and low in price is predominantly down to its plastic build, which is kind of to be expected with a budget lens. Though on the plus side, it does have some very nice little embellishments, including a rubberized focusing ring that rotates really smoothly and is actually really nice and responsive when focusing manually. The lens mount is made from solid metal rather than hard plastic, which can sometimes be the case with cheaper lenses, so that's a nice touch. And they've even gone to the effort of including a metal filter thread on the front, so that should help reduce wear and tear. On the side of the lens barrel, there's an MF to AF switch and also a focus hold button that can be customized to act as a shortcut to a host of other functions. So far, so good, I'd say. I mean, yeah, it's a little bit plasticky, but for a lens that's less than £300, I kind of expect that anyway. But I guess the real challenge is going to be whether it can deliver on image quality. So let's head over to the lens chart now and see what it's capable of. Looking at this unprocessed raw image that was shot wide open at f1.8, we could immediately see that this lens suffers from some quite severe pin cushion distortion at the edges of the frame. The corners of the frame are also noticeably darker too due to the effects of vignetting, but these issues can all be cleaned up quite quickly in Lightroom or Photoshop if this type of thing really bothers you. If we zoom into the center, the results are actually quite impressive. This lens is offering a nice sharp image with no noticeable signs of chromatic aberration. At the corners, the sharpness starts to drop off a little bit, and we can then start to see some evidence of fringing starting to appear, but overall, really not a bad performance for such a cheap lens. When shooting at the lens's minimum focusing distance of 0.8 meters or 2.63 feet, we can see that the sharpness is still pretty good, although you can now start to see some small amounts of blue fringing starting to appear. Okay, so now it's time to see how this thing handles out in the real world. When shooting at f1.8, this 85mm is going to give you a lovely defocused background, even when shooting full-length portraits, and the bokeh was nice and smooth. Now, I've got to admit, before shooting with this lens, I was half expecting it to be a total nightmare to focus with due to its cheap price tag, but I've got to say, I was pleasantly surprised. With IAF and face detection enabled on my Sony A7 III, the lens was able to track Amber's face with no hesitation. However, it wasn't all plain sailing, because when I later inspected my images in Lightroom, I did notice that this lens has a tendency to front focus every so often, meaning that even when my camera was telling me that the focus was bang on to Amber's pupils, the resulting image was actually focused just on the tip of her eyelashes or sometimes on her cheek. I found that this was the same when shooting full-length portraits too, as you can see in this image here where Amber's shoulder is the sharpest point despite the camera locking onto her face. On a positive note though, there was no noticeable color cast to the image, and I thought that the skin tones looked really nice and natural with a nice amount of contrast present in all of the images. So going back to the subject of autofocus for a moment, when deactivating face detection, the lens was able to focus quickly and accurately between near and far subjects when shooting in good lighting conditions. In low light, this good performance continues. Although the reticle would sometimes take a little bit longer to light up green just to confirm that the focus was locked on, it still managed to lock on and it showed no signs of hunting through our testing. In our bokeh balls test, this lens performed pretty well, offering nice round orbs at the center, though these did start to slowly morph into that cat's eye shape towards the edges of the frame. Switching over to video mode, and when shooting wide open at f1.8, this lens was able to track a moving subject walking towards the camera with no issues at all. The performance was equally as good when the subject was walking at a fast pace too. In terms of AF noise, inside this thing there's a stepping motor, so it's pretty quiet. And this is potentially good news for videographers who need their glass to function as quietly as possible so that it doesn't compromise audio quality. Okay, so now with all of our tests complete, it's time to come up with a verdict for this lens. For a lens with a price tag as low as this, the Yongnuo 85mm f1.8 is a surprisingly good little lens. It's small, lightweight, and offers pretty good image quality. Although the AF is quick, quiet, and doesn't suffer from hunting, the copy that I tested did have a slight front focusing issue, which isn't ideal, especially if you're like myself and enjoy capturing portraits with a wide aperture. Personally, I need a lens that's able to focus every single time, because at f1.8, if the focus is off even by a few millimeters, it can sometimes mean that your images are totally unusable, and that's no good when you're trying to make a living from your camera. That said, if you're just a hobbyist looking for a nice portrait lens, or you rarely shoot wide open, or you prefer to shoot manual focus, or even you're just an artsy type that really doesn't care if your focus isn't pin sharp every single time, then this might not be a deal breaker for you. And I've got to be honest, this AF issue is really the only thing I have to moan about in this review, because otherwise it's a pretty decent lens, especially for the amount that Yongnuo are asking for it. Let's put it this way, for a sub £300 lens, I was fully expecting this thing to be soft as shit, hunt like hell, and sound like a blender every time it's trying to lock on focus, but luckily it's none of those things, which is a really pleasant surprise. Now naturally, when presented with a pretty well-performing low-budget lens, I wonder how this thing stacks up against the other budget 85mm options that are available out there for Sony cameras. Last year we tested the Viltrox 85mm f1.8 Mark II, and that turned out to be just as surprising, and if you haven't seen that review yet, be sure to click here to see the full thing. There's also the Sony 85mm f1.8 to consider, which is kind of regarded as the holy grail of budget portrait primes. But this Yongnuo is half the price of that Sony lens, so how would this Yongnuo handle itself against the Sony? Is it worth spending the extra money on the Sony? I don't know. If you're interested too, and you would like to see maybe a budget 85mm group test or something like that, then be sure to let me know in the comments below, and maybe even let me know what 85mm f1.8 lenses you would like to see in that test. As always, if we get enough people asking for it, we will make that happen for you. It's just how much we love you. Anyway, that's about it for now, guys. As always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all again next Friday in a new video.